All right, now I am pleased to introduce Reyes Tercero, and she is from Stanley Community College. Cha is the instruction and technology librarian for Stanley Community College, and she specializes in graphic novels and manga. So I will now hand it over to Cha.
Thank you. Hello everybody at the conference. This is probably my first like Zoom conference, so I'm a little nervous. But so the title is Diversifying Your Collection. So the first thing we're going to have is a poll, and the poll should be presented on the Zoom screen. Yes.
Yes, I've just
So how well do you know the demographics of the patrons at your library? So feel free to answer. I'll give everybody a minute. All right, and is it possible to get the results for that? All right, so we have 24% that says very well. Somewhat well is 53%, some 18, and not very well is 6%. And that's okay. That's understandable. So that's the whole point. All right, so our next slide. Yes. So I'm going to introduce myself. You already know, my name is Reyes Tercero. I'm originally from Chicago, but I live in Cabarrus County, North Carolina. It is very congested, but I love it nonetheless. I have been in librarianship about 3 years. I graduated with my MLS from Old Dominion University. My hobbies include reading manga, watching anime, video games, and doing weird things with my husband. So there's that. And my favorite genre when it comes to books, of course, would be horror. I am an expert in that genre. And of course, anything manga or graphic novel related, because I think like manga is the best thing that has ever been created as far as literature. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to access your current collection. So start by evaluating your existing collection. So most people like to run reports, of course, to see what their current collection looks like. And then sometimes when they run reports, they like to compare them against other libraries that have the same type of demographic or makeup. So, and then it gives you a chance to identify any gaps that you have. I know with us, we like to run a report to see what we have based on what we currently have and if it's outdated. Because as you know, times have changed, a lot of things have changed with what's currently happening in the world. And as the next generation goes on, it's not the same as the previous generation. I am a mid-millennial and I do not have the same hobbies or interests as Gen Zers. That is a completely different demographic, completely. And so when that happens, that's usually when you have to start like weeding things out based on outdated information or things that no currently strikes the interest of the current generation. And then you have to see where your representation is lacking. So you have to ask yourself, what does it lack? Part of your collection it needs to change, basically. And so if you don't really know those questions, that's the point of running the report. So it's important to look at different authors, themes, and main characters because it's important for students or your patrons to see themselves within their book. A lot of people like to read books that relate to them. So even if it's like supernatural, if it's horror, it's paranormal, if it's fantasy, they would like to be able to see themselves in the main character, which is why a lot of manga is popular because people can see themselves in certain characters in the manga. So it is important to set inclusive goals. So define your goals for diversification. So we have reports based on what our students' age groups are, race, ethnicity, and like different types of backgrounds. So that way, when we pick our collection, we pick it based on what our students look like. Simple as that. So what does that look like for you? You have to know exactly who your patrons are, who's your community, who are you serving? Now, I'm not asking people to know every single person that comes into their library or every single person that they meet, know their name, their face. I do forget a lot of names. I definitely remember a lot of faces, but it's still important to know what they're like and what their interests are because libraries are here to serve the community. Another thing is who are you trying to present within your community? A lot of people feel there are marginalized groups who kind of get left out of things. Like recently, fantasy has always been a predominantly white area. And then as the genre has come over the years, there has been more BIPOC involved in fantasy. And that's important for students because now students are looking for, well, does the character represent me? Like, is it a strong female role? Is it a male role? Is it a trans person? Is it like people want to see themselves within that book? And that's completely understandable because then it makes it more relatable towards you. Nobody wants to read something they know nothing about. I know I don't. So determine which communities or perspectives are underrepresented. So that's the whole point of running your report. So even if you don't know exactly, like most colleges, especially community colleges, and I know universities know what the makeup is or the demographics for their students. But public libraries, it could be a little different. You may not actually get to ask those questions, or if you're not there all the time, you don't see what the community looks like. And if you work a certain shift, you may not see what the type of people that come in throughout the day. So that usually just depends. So set targets for improving representation in these areas. So a year plan would work. So for most colleges, I know they have like a 3 to 5 year plan. So if it's a public library, maybe you can work the same way. So your plan is to which sections you would like to go through first. If you feel like they are outdated, do you feel like they need to be weeded? And see when the person or how many people have checked it out and when it was checked out. Just because it's a popular genre for you doesn't mean it's popular for your community. So, for instance, I'm a big Stephen King fan, but you would be surprised how many people in the current generation doesn't read Stephen King. If they haven't seen the movie, then they probably don't even know who he is. So, and just because it's very popular doesn't mean you have to keep it, because what's the point of keeping a book if nobody's going to read it? So, research diverse authors and publishers. So, this is actually not a hard one. You can do a quick Google search, to be honest, and you can look at diverse authors. And you can literally put it in a Google search and it will bring you a whole list. I know Goodreads does a very, very, very extensive list if that's who you're into looking for. But you get to explore books with different main characters that fit different demographics. So it does work out. There are authors like N.K. Jemisin, because she wrote like 100,000 Kingdoms, which was probably one of the books I read in undergrad. There's M.K. Asante, Adrienne Mendoza, Nadine Kadan, I could be mispronouncing that, and Joyce Ching. It's spelled Chng, so I'm not really sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But there are authors that are like that. They write based on the demographic that they fit into. So it gives you a chance to have an author that fits the background, that fits the story, that fits the student, that fits the patron. So, and it's important because you have to think about the audience that you want to reach. So, and then if you have to put films or DVDs, Blu-rays within your library, then you should look for diverse filmmakers. So I looked up a few films and I didn't even honestly know that most of these directors did these films. So One Night in Miami was by Regina King. If anybody knows Regina King, she has a very long list of acting since 227 when she was a kid. Then Beast of No Nation was by Akari Fukunaga. And then Ryan Coogler did Black Panther, Creed, and then Loveling Tadan did Slumdog Millionaire. I could be mispronouncing that name as well. But these are people who fit what the theme of the movie was about. It fits their demographic, it fits their background. And these are popular films. I've never seen Slumdog Millionaire, but I heard it was like absolutely amazing. So it is on my to watch list. So you have to look beyond mainstream sources to discover lesser known creators and content. So even though an author has been writing forever, it doesn't mean that their content is still something current for most generations. Once again, you go back to it goes back to Stephen King. So Stephen King wrote his first book, Carrie, probably when he was 26. When he was 26, and you think about how old he is now. Now, Carrie is still accurate. It is, because there has been several remakes, but if there's not the movie, then most people don't know anything about the book in the current generation. So you have to think about it like that. And then there are a lot of upcoming authors who have maybe written one book. It's not really out there yet, but they write some good things, and there's things that need to be considered. So use diverse selection criteria. If you're wondering what this picture is, this is one of my favorite mangas. It's Fire Force. It is an anime and it's absolutely adorable, but it is like 30 volumes. So it's a lot. And if you don't have the budget for that, that's a lot to order. So develop inclusive selection criteria that prioritize diversity. So you look at what your current collection looks like once again and see who are the main authors of these books. Now, that doesn't always work with like English, because if you haven't seen things that are written in Shakespearean times, they're normally prominently white males. But we're talking about more current literature, something that you can actually pick apart. Consider factors such as cultural relevance. If a person is writing about it, do they fit the background that they're writing about? So there are authors that fit the LGBTQIA plus community, and they write about things that are involved in there. There's a graphic novel called I Think My Son is Gay. And it's a manga, and it works because the author who created the manga has a background in that. And so it's really good, still currently going, and I do recommend checking it out. Um, is it authentic? Now, there are some people who will write about things they don't know anything about, and it can get published. I have seen that. I have seen people, there are, once again, going back to Stephen King, this is something he's good at. He has a formula, he pulls things out of certain books, and he recycles the same material. If you're a big fan, then you will know that this is what he does. And so he has a formula to this. There are people who know nothing about the background that they're writing about, but since they have a formula to it, they're successful at it. Doesn't mean it is always right. There are people who write about ghosts, never encountered a ghost, don't believe in the paranormal, don't believe in the supernatural, things like that. There are people who write about demographics that they don't fit in. If you've never walked in that person's shoes, that may not be the right representation of what that is. So you kind of have to be careful with that as far as picking books. So is it a potential to amplify marginalized voices? The best way to think about it is, I know when I pick books, I pick different continents. I go continent first. And then I think about all the different countries and what authors there are writing. If there's an English translation to it, is it popular? And sometimes I try to read the book myself. I want to see what the book is about. Like personally, when it comes to graphic novels and manga, if I haven't read it first, I probably wouldn't recommend it, because I can say, oh, the book is great. You can judge a book by its cover. I honestly believe that. The book may look great on the outside, but then on the inside, you could be like, this is awful. Why would anybody do that? And some books like that will get published without a second thought. So if you would not read it yourself, or something that you wouldn't recommend to someone else, I wouldn't usually recommend it. But also, students will tell you what they like. You have to listen to your community. If you don't even know what they want, you should listen to them. Just ask them what they want. So expand genres and formats. I love cats. So there's a cat with a cup of coffee in the book. That's what I want to do later. So you have to diversify across genres and formats. So fiction, nonfiction, poetry, graphic novels, audiobooks, films, documentaries. So documentaries are still current. They're still making tons of documentaries. There's a documentary right now I want to watch because of something that has currently happened within the hip hop community. And now it's like all over the place. And so people still listen to audiobooks. Dogwood Digital is probably the biggest when it comes to audiobooks besides Amazon. And that's something to think about. A lot of people still like audiobooks. Not really a Gen Z thing, but that is okay. Audiobooks make me sleepy, so it's not for everybody. And then it ensures representation across various interests and reading preferences. So if you decide to find a book that you think is really good and other students like it, can you find it in an ebook? Can you find it in an audiobook? But you have to think about it in other ways of how would they like to be able to read it. Because believe it or not, most students, not everybody reads at the reading level they should be at, or that we think or society thinks they should be at, which is why this helps. Another thing is Bram Stoker's Dracula. I've read the book. I've read the graphic novel. I've heard the audiobook. The graphic novel version is literally like the condensed version. It just sums everything up and it makes everything good. I recommend graphic novels for students who want to read the classic literature of a book, but does not have the reading level to finish the book. And that's something to think about. If you're going to get a book, make sure there's other formats that will help students understand that book, because you can read that book and that book is very complicated to read. I've read We Have Always Lived in This Castle, and from the first time I read it in college, I was like, I have no idea what's happening in this book. And then Netflix came out with a movie and I was like, this makes sense now. So that's something to think about. But when it comes to fiction, I do recommend, based on background, The Kite Runner, which is also a graphic novel. So if you're going to get that one, you should also get the graphic novel, which I think is really good. And the background for that one is Afghanistan. The Life of Pi, the background was Spain. So it does keep it's very diverse. So if you do have people within a community, books make a big difference. And also with graphic novels, it helps people who have learning disabilities or limit in their capabilities of reading, because there are students who will read a book. I've had students come to me and say, I read the book, I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to interpret how the characters feel. But graphic novels they paint a picture for you when you can't paint the picture for yourself. And so it gives you a chance to know how the characters should feel or what is happening. And so that's why that's recommended. But Things Fall Apart was Nigeria, the Joy Luck Club was Chinese American, and the House of Spirits was actually Peruvian. So something to think about. All these books have these different backgrounds and they're important. So this book, actually, I have had a chance to read it. I thought it was a great read. And this book is actually based on West African mythology. And so if you have students who are from that region or patrons, this book may resonate to them. So it support own voices. Prioritize own voices literature where creators share the same identity or background as the characters they portray. The authenticity can offer unique perspectives and narratives. And the author of this book, I think, yes, she's from West Africa. Can't pinpoint the country right away. But yes, the fantasy is based on West African mythology. And I thought it was a great book, not from the background myself, so I didn't understand a lot of the references, but it did give me a chance to learn something new. And a lot of students could learn something new from that. Plus, it gives a chance for students who have not met people from other cultures or backgrounds to actually have an insight or look into the other cultures. So, curate diverse themes. If you know George Takia, I could be pronouncing his name wrong, his last name. They Called Us Enemy. We actually own this graphic novel, and it is about him being of course, a Japanese American and the camp. And so if you don't know who he is, he's from Star Trek, and he played Sulu. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. It's from the first one, so it's Captain Kirk, not Captain Picard. I have to remember that. So it's where Spock. And so it's a good one. It is a memoir, and there's a lot of graphic novels that are memoirs. So it teaches history from the perspective of the person who experienced the history. And I think that is important as well, because if students don't know anything about history, there are graphic novels that will dedicate to that. But Incorporate materials that explore diverse themes like immigration, race relations, LGBTQ plus experience, disabilities, mental health, neurodivergent. This broadens readers' perspective. There are students or patrons who have never experienced people in any of these categories. I have met people who have said, no, I've never met anybody like that. Now I'm like, well, would you like to read about people like that? Because I think it's important that people understand that everybody in the world is not like them. And so that's where your collection comes into play. Your collection, think about it as if a person who has never left their town, never left their state, they don't know anything about the outside world. They may never have used internet, may have never used a cell phone, but they get a chance to open their eyes to the world through what they read. So it is important, if you can, collaborate with your staff and your stakeholders. So involve library staff, committees, stakeholders. See what they think about it. Sometimes people don't realize that not librarians don't just pick the material based on what they like. They pick it based on a lot of different factors. So encourage open discussion about diversity, solicited recommendations from diverse team members. So if you don't know what to recommend or you don't know what to do, ask someone else. Hi, what are you reading? What do you like about that book? Do you know the origin of that book? Who's the author? And then just kind of find the author and see everything they've written and then go from there. You would be surprised what books came from what author. I've read books and I was like, this is great. And when I realized who the author is, I was like, I would have never guessed. And sometimes that happens. Regularly update and rotate. So for us, we like to do ours every year in the summer. So the summertime, since we're college, we like to make sure we go through our weeding process. We want to see what's being read, what's being used, what is being circulated. And that is important to know because even though it's scary to throw away your books or give them away or take them out of the collection, you have to make room for new, up-to-date ideas. So continuously refresh your collection to reflect current trends and emerging voices. That's important. And history, of course, is important, yes, but current voices are important. What is happening currently? What is the current trend? What is the current generation interested in? That's where it comes into play. Perfect example. I come from the generation where when I read manga, Sailor Moon was the most popular thing. I have met Gen Zers who don't know what Sailor Moon is. They like My Hero Academia. I have never read one thing by them. I watched one episode. I was like, this is not the type I like, and so I left it alone. But for us, our top 5 manga is completely different what Gen Z's top 5 manga was. So completely different. So regularly remove outdated or problematic material while adding new diverse content. And this is important because a lot of libraries don't take things out because they said that it's historically accurate. That is true. And sometimes it's a little biased and you have to look at that. Is it? You don't want a student or a patron coming to your library, picking up something and reading it and feeling uncomfortable. A library is supposed to be a safe space and they should be able to read a book and realize, okay, this is what it's about, but not feel like there was any negative intentions of this book. And so that is important to think about. We have taken outdated things in our book. Like there are books that are still out there in libraries that talk about how one shouldn't do certain things. And you're just like, oh, yikes. And so that's just something to think about. So promote and highlight. Actively promote diverse materials through displays. So right now it is the Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so that is what people should highlight. Talk about all the different groups that fit within that group that you're celebrating. And talk about their cultures and all the tribal things and just make it a big thing. Like everybody should be celebrated for their cultural background. So that's very important. Create a reading list based on it. Any authors that you think come to mind, any movies that you think come to mind, make a list of it and say, hey, this is what the month is about. You should check these things out. and try to make sure that you have some of the books. Now, you may not be able to have all of them because even now, some books are hard to find or hard to get, and they sell out pretty fast and they're on back order. So you can do what you can, but ebooks are usually the best way to go. Author events. Some libraries can afford that. Some of us cannot. That just depends. But if you find an author, especially a nice local author who has written a book that you think would be really popular with your community, ask them to come by, read, speak to the community and tell them, hey, why did you write this? And what made you want to do this? And then community programming. So that's always important because you want your programming to reflect your community. If you have a community with a huge children population, your program should reflect that. Reading time, snack time, arts, all of the above. Like, you should be able to have people who want to read to them. Dr. Seuss is really big when it comes to children's programming. Have someone dress up as the cat in the hat. I've done that before. It's really cute. So that's something to think about. And highlighting these resources encourage engagement and fosters inclusivity. Ugh, sorry. So it's important because engagement is important for the library. Plain and simple. You exist because your community needs you. That's the only way I can ever think about libraries. We need them, and that's why they need us. We need them. That's why we exist. And so engagement helps the community realize that they're not by themselves, or if they need help, there's someone to help them. It's like my grandma says, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it just takes a village in general these days. So, and that is where the library comes into play. We are the community and we're the village. So seek feedback. Now, this one can go many ways. I know I've seen people who have those QR codes at the library, and then people with phones can just scan them and give them feedback based on things they need to improve about the library, things that they like to see in the library, things they would like resources wise or books wise or events they would like them to host. If you are not technology savvy, then you could be one of those people who send out the mailers, or you could be a person who sends links out through the email through SurveyMonkey. But it's important to be able to get feedback to see, hey, I've done all these improvements, I've done all these changes, am I doing anything right? Or if I'm not, tell me what I'm doing wrong. Now, just because we think we're doing everything right doesn't mean the community agrees, and that does happen sometimes. So encourage feedback from library users about the collection's diversity. You would be surprised. There are students who go through it and go, I don't think that's right anymore. And you're like, okay, well, what would you like to see? I didn't realize people still like reading Harry Potter. And they're like, hey, do you have this in audio? And I'm like, sure, you can do a Dogwood Digital, or you can do it through a CD-ROM. And I never realized how many students didn't know audiobooks could be on a disc. But regular surveys are important. If you want to do little slips of paper where they could just fill them out and stick them in a little box, there are people who still prefer it that way. That's another way to do it. At the end of the day, take them all out, read them, see what you can improve. Comment cards, of course, what's working well, where improvements are needed. So, and people will let you know after an event, they will let you know, hey, this didn't work, or enough people didn't show up, or maybe you should try this, or they'll tell you maybe the time frame didn't work. And then it gives you a chance to be able to mold your programming or mold your collection to fit what fits everyone. Now, I'm not saying we can please everybody, but majority, yes, we probably can. Professional development. Now, I think this is needed because a lot of people work in areas that are not very diverse, plain and simple. And so professional development would be the best way, I guess, to bridging the gap for a lot of librarians, because if we live in an area that lacks diversity, then at least we can get professional development to help us understand the part of the community that we no longer have or that we lack. So invest in training and development for library staff on diversity, equity, inclusion. It's important to know what the differences are. Now, everybody should be, once again, be able to see themselves in the library, see themselves in the material. It's like being a teacher. Kids are really excited to go to school because they get to see people who are like themselves. And that's what is important in the library. You want to be able to see yourselves in the library staff, in the librarians, in the books, in the programming, because it's a safe space and you're supposed to feel comfortable in a library. It's supposed to be your safe haven from the chaos that is the world. This empowers staff to better serve diverse communities and make informed selection decisions. And that is important because if we don't know what the community needs, then how can we make the right decisions? So, because there are communities like when I was a teacher, majority of my students were from India. I had kindergartners and 70% of my class was from India. And I was like, I would have never known in the school. I went into the school and I would have never known that when I first walked into the school. And then when I got my class, I was like, the rest of the school doesn't look like this. And so that's why that's important. And then they want teachers or faculty, you need to be able to see yourself once again in that community. And even if you're going into a new community that you're not used to, this is where professional development comes in handy. Don't make assumptions. You know the saying. Don't make any assumptions about diversity, equity, or inclusion. If you don't know, ask questions. There are professional development, there are videos, there are something to help you bridge that gap so that way you can better serve the community. Because once again, we exist because they need us. So here are my references for the slides. If nobody knew, I'm a big Hello Kitty fan. The first one was Gingerbread Hello Kitty. If you don't know Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, that is one of my favorite manga and I recommend it. It's very wholesome. The rest is clip art. Whisper of the Heart, if you don't know anything about that anime. Fire Force, T-Turtle, if you don't know what that is, it's just a brand. Maple Story, and then Luffy D, which is the longest anime and manga that has probably ever existed on the planet, which is One Piece. And here are some interesting sites that talk about diversity and auditing your collection. Now, hopefully you will get access to the PowerPoint so you can just click on them, but it will let you see the different diverse comics, the diverse books, so that way you don't have to do the whole search by yourself. Because Google can be a long rabbit hole, and eventually all the links and websites start blurring together. And so this would help. Most of it came from the State Library Journal. Some of them come from ALA, American Libraries Magazine. So if you need help with diversifying your collection, there are links that will help you with that. So here are some of the books I recommend. So as far as graphic novels, queer graphic novel, I really think is a good one. Mama is actually more of a memoir about losing your parents, of course, and how to cope with that. Once again, students need to be able to see themselves in the book. Some children or patrons don't come from the two-parent household, the structure that everybody thinks that you come from. And so books usually help us cope with things that are happening in our life that we're not prepared to talk about, which is why there needs to be books, vast majority, that needs to be diverse. So there is books on pride, if that is part of your community. Their book on Chinese heritage. There is a book on Welcome to St. Hell, which is about a trans story, which there are students who are transitioning and they don't know how to cope with what's happening with them. And so this book helps. I like Who the F because this is one of my favorite books. It's about a young girl. She comes from a community and then she goes to a different community. She's known in her community as the hijabi. And then when she finally goes to a town where everybody's like her, she's like, what is my identity outside of my religion, outside my culture? And so you may get people who don't know that. You might get students or children or teenagers who just moved into town and they're figuring out identity. Eyes That Kiss in the Corners. This is a very cute book, and it's about understanding a child who has an Asian background and they're wondering why they look different than everyone else. So I think that some of the, oh, sorry. Yes. So for the most part, all the books and every person who wrote the book actually comes from that cultural background. So this is why I chose these books. So in conclusion, which I did not talk the whole time because I try not to get long-winded, but listen to your community. Nobody can tell you better than your community. You can weed out your books, you can try to figure out everything, but at the end of the day, your community can tell you what they need. So if you don't know, that's the best way to go. Any questions, concerns, or comments? I'm thirsty now.
Thanks so much, Cha, for that great presentation. It's really great to see all of the diverse collection development that you've been doing and ideas for how to do that.
Thank you. I'm like sweating over here.
You did
Okay,
great.
thanks.
So we do have one question so far, and everyone else feel free to ask more, either put them in the chat or the Q&A. And I'm also changing the settings so you're able to unmute yourself if you would prefer to ask it via audio. So the question is how you would recommend advertising diverse content and collections within the collection, or do you highlight them for content in certain areas of the library by genre?
Honestly, I think displays. When you get something new in and it highlights anything, there should be a display for it. Let people know that it's there, plain and simple. Especially if it's a certain month. So if it's like Black History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, and you happen to get new things, focus the whole display about all the new books that you got that represents what this month was about. No matter what it is, it could be Women's History Month. If you've got new books and it's diverse, you should always advertise it. And even if it's something that you already have in your collection, you feel like it's not getting enough attention, but it fits that criteria, create a display, let everybody know that it exists. Bright colors, lots of glitter, any way you can do it. If you can, put some neon lights on it, but let people know that it exists.
Great, and I also just give a plug that for NC Live electronic collections, we have a marketing newsletter, and when there is like a certain theme happening that month, like Black History Month or Asian American History Month, we send out suggestions for like social media posts and other marketing collateral that you can use to advertise NC Live content in those areas. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for our newsletters or social media to get that content. All right, so another question is, if it's a sensitive topic, how do you advertise?
Okay, so that's always been a hard one. So if the topic is sensitive, I would advertise it, but just make it a little more subtle, I guess, about advertising. Instead of the whole billboard in the display right in that area, kind of do social media, or if you can, bookmarks. And then when you have your display of these bookmarks, they can pull the different topics, and then that'll be a different way to advertise it. Let them know what the title of the book is, where the book is located, things like that, if it's a sensitive topic. Because when it comes to things like that, we prefer not to broadcast it because it makes people uncomfortable. So if you can advertise it more subtle. And so I recommend like bookmarks, maybe flyers, things like that, but not the whole display situation. And if you think that makes people uncomfortable, just put up a display and say, these are different topics. If you would like to know more, just come to the library, the reference desk, and we can point you in the right direction. Any other questions? It could be manga related or graphic novel related too.
I was going to say I loved all the manga images that you had.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I know One Piece is like the biggest one right now. And it may never end. It may never end. And for any library, you have to have a huge budget just to even get a complete collection of One Piece. So that would cost probably hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to complete that collection. So it was nice to see this one in the comments liked Fire Force. I have never finished watching the anime, but I am wrapping up on the manga. It's like 300 something chapters. So it was nice to see someone comment said manga and young adult are the most checked out material. I agree for us as well, especially with Attack on Titans. The anime wrapped up and now everybody wants to read the manga to make a comparison. So, and with Demon Slayer's new season coming out last Sunday, now everybody wants to read that again. So,
What do you think your most successful display or promotion has been lately?
actually our most successful one is a date with a book. It's like so they wrap the book up like it's in this brown paper is decorated and everything. And so when Valentine's Day comes around and it gives you a description of what the book is, and then you have to check out the book and read it for yourself before you can even get to see what the book is about. So I like that one. It's really popular. All the students, they usually come in the spring semesters just like, that sounds like fun. So they usually get checked out pretty fast. And it gives students a chance to read something they would normally read.
Mhm.
So that's probably the most popular one.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds really fun.
It is.